Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. It's Friday, the 18th Yud Ches Sivan, Chai Sivan, June 17th. I should say it's 2022. And we're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. And right now, we are studying Masechet Shabbos, chapter 16, page Kuf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, but really we're just about Kuf Chaf Beis. That's 122B. We had been talking about the response to dangerous animals, if you can kill them. We didn't really discuss if you can trap them, but by extension, a question of trapping. And is there a distinction between being chased? Is there a distinction between being lethal, fatal, or not? And we saw an apparent tension in the halacha, possibly depending on how you view melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. And ultimately, the bottom line is, if it is super dangerous and chasing you, nobody doubts that you should kill it. If it's an immediate and present danger, even if it's not actively chasing you, you can also kill it. The question comes to critters that as a species may be dangerous, but are generally not dangerous. So then one shouldn't be seeking them out. If you're being chased, that's where we may have a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, melacha she'ein tzricha legufa and melacha she'tzricha legufa. The animal is not hazardous, but it is uncomfortable. And so the Gemara seems to have a solution. If you're just walking along and you notice it, you can, with kavana, step on that animal to neutralize it, but you might not be able to do something that's more clear and evidently an act of trapping. In the Shulchan, hold on. So yesterday we saw the Shulchan Aruch, and I think it more or less clarified that, right? We read the Shulchan Aruch yesterday, that you're allowed to kill a dangerous animal, for sure. You know, we'll share the screen. We'll glance one more time at that halacha, and then we'll move on. While I find it, Reb Beryl, go ahead.
Rabbi, I think the common thread here between the fire and this is prevention, avoiding, and solving the problem. And are we supposed to, first of all, try to prevent something from getting burnt and then the fire? And maybe the same kind of question with the animals.
Well,
should we try to trap him rather than kill him right away?
There's an essential distinction, which is the fire is not pikuach nefesh, and if it is, you could put it out. And these critters are pikuach nefesh, and therefore you obviously can kill them. Did I share the screen? I didn't share the screen. Let me share the screen. We'll look real fast at the Shulchan Aruch. I know we read it yesterday, and then we'll move on to the next subject, which will be equally interesting. Here, on the side of the page. Kol chaya v'remes, sheim noishchen umemisin, vadai, or maybe saying any animal which bites and kills, vadai narogim Shabbos, you can certainly kill it. Afilu ein ratzin acharav, even if one is not being chased, because you're not being chased, but you are protecting other people who do not know to be careful or mindful. So let's say if you're from Florida, you know that there's a difference between, what was it, a coral snake and a gardener snake, and if the red touches the black. If red touches yellow, it's a problem. If red touches black, you're okay. I think that's the way it goes. But if you're a northerner, you're coming from Montreal, the person might not know. So you should be proactive in getting rid of those hazards if they're in civilization. So therefore, afilu ein ratzin acharav ushar mazikin. What about other dangerous creatures that are not fatal? In a case where they are not fatal, then im ratzin acharav motel hargam. If you're being chased, this is how the Shulchan Aruch here distills the Gemara based on his understanding. If you're being chased, you can kill it. But if you're not being chased and it's not a pikuach nefesh situation, also you may not kill it. But you are yet allowed to tread on it as you're going along, even if it is actually your intention. So this Shulchan Aruch And it's not that this is not necessarily everyone's sheet of how to understand the Gemara. He gives us three scenarios: an absolutely fatal animal, kill it, go out of the way to kill it, even if it's not chasing you. An animal that is dangerous or unpleasant, but not fatal, you can only kill it when it's chasing you. It really
bothers me a little bit.
Hold on. But if the animal is not chasing you, and it's not life-threatening, but it's in your way, and it is going to be a great discomfort, then you can kill it. Doctor, what bothers?
I mean, it's a total make-believe. You're allowed to do it on purpose, but make believe that you're not doing it on purpose.
Because halacha has
either yes or no, either do it or you don't do it.
No, because halacha has a broader concern with misinforming people and people being led to think that it's absolutely okay to kill animals. So
it's a question of Maris.
What?
It's a question of Maris.
Yeah, so this is not a conventional Marisayan, but there's a concern about presentation. If we want to revisit, I think it was the Mishnah Brura who really recaps the Gemara. Why afilu b'miskaven as long as you don't show yourself? So he gives us the theory behind it.
Yeah, background noise, Rabbi.
Yeah, it's our dear Chabura members. Okay, let me hit mute all. I think I hit mute all. Go ahead. Please unmute for comments or questions. Here it's a malacha shein tzricha legufa. You're not desiring the effect of the trapping or killing. When they actually cause harm, there's no gzera. Kishein hargam lahedya, so long as you don't explicitly and outright kill it. Ela sheyara lifnei haraya kilum in miskaven. The impression is that you're not doing it with kavana. Shelo yomer zanoitel neshama b'Shabbos miskaven. So the person shouldn't say, I see Dr. whatever from Yid. We look up to him. He's and I see him killing an animal miskaven. And they're not going to be able to draw a distinction between a snake and another critter. And therefore, you shouldn't be misleading by non-dangerous but uncomfortable animals. But if you're going on your way and the snake is there and you step on it and you neutralize you help someone avoid panic, okay. And then he says, but other animals that are entirely or relatively, in mild, well, then you shouldn't step on them, even derech hilucham. So that's, yeah. Anyways, I took a look. I'm not going to share with you. I took a look on the Shulchan Aruch Harav, and he gets into a little bit more of the more nuanced scenarios. And he also, in general, the Shulchan Aruch Harav presents the he goes through the mahalach of malacha shein tzricha legufa, chayiv and potter. Anyways, but it's that's the general picture here. Let's go on to New Gemara now. We have, if you recall, we closed out our discussion about snakes and scorpions, a story of Rabbi Abba Bar Kana sharing that a snake once fell into Rabbi's base medrash, someone killed it, he made a comment, and the Gemara's question was that a compliment or was that an insult? And the Gemara did not really have a conclusive answer if it was a compliment or not. And it was where the Gemara introduced the idea of lefi tumai. Rabbi Yanai said, I kill these creatures, but maybe he's not talking about going out and killing them. Maybe it was Dilma lefi tumai. Maybe it was just as he was walking along the way. And so the Gemara hasn't concluded if Rebbe was satisfied and appreciative of the killing of that snake that fell into the base medrash. And again, Rashi says, not that he got up and stabs it, shoots it, sprays it up. If he's just happening to walk along and he lets himself tread on the animal, if that kills the animal, good. So anyways, that's how Rashi explains it. Now the Gemara then continues and adds off with three other little details. Or one, well, let's start with one detail. Rav Yehuda, as Rav Yehuda taught, Roik Dar Soilifi Tumay. If there is saliva on the ground in your house, and remember we're talking about earth floors, you can step on the saliva even though very likely you're going to be smoothing out the earth in a more substantive way because there's some moisture. Why are you allowed to step on spittle on the ground? So Rashi explains, this act of stepping on this is not with the intention of smoothing out the floor or to fill in holes. Wow. Even though with his treading, he is smoothing out the earth.
Why is there an issue with spit? Why? I mean, it's you have rain. When it rains, you can.
So that might be a similar issue, and there actually may be less, at least according to Rashi, less leniency. But in ancient times, apparently it was common. The earth was the indoor, your interior. We're not talking about outside. Your interior was made of loose earth, and if a person spits, they would step on it, as Rashi explains, mishum usa, to kind of wipe it away. But inadvertently, along that process, you are also smoothing out the floor. But if it's leafy tumai, that's acceptable. That's what Rav Yehuda taught. Yes.
No, I think the question makes sense. Why not just say any liquid? Could be oil, could be who knows what.
I just gave the answer because there's something unique about spittle, which is that it's ma'os. And so halach, as Rashi just says, so there's more of an inclination to be lenient about something that you kind of want to cover and wipe up. Right? You see here highlighted in Rashi, although you are smoothing out earth, that's not your intention. Shari, you're allowed to if it's not your intention. Mishum, mi'usa, Rashi says because of it being disgusting. So it is possible that would not be extended to other liquids which need less, which is less urgent that they be spread out. And if just while we're here, just to show you, lo yishaf shefaragle roy kol gabe karka, he shouldn't rub it around with his foot. Mishum demashra gumois. But mutul darsa if he told me allowed to step on it. Shenim is kavel marech al hashvas gumois. Afagav the middle marechu. So he really quotes Rashi here, saying again, you can't wipe it out with your foot, but you can step on it. And the reason why we're more lenient is because of the mius, the gross. What's a good word? The fact that it is not considered a pleasant thing, so you can at least step on it to eliminate it on Shabbos. And that is Rashi's language, and that trickles down into halacha l'maisa.
Spit could be dangerous.
What?
Spit could be dangerous also.
Not on an earth floor.
Sure. If somebody's got a bad cold and it postnasal drip, that's an infection. If it's infected and everything like that.
What do you step on it?
You can step anyways, on it,
the medicine at the time of the Gemara, they were not aware of the infection that would be present in postnasal drip. I think that's pretty clear from the Gemara. But it was considered very unpleasant, and therefore there was an inclination to be lenient. There was an inclination to be lenient about stepping on spit.
That's why they invented spittoons.
Yeah. All right. The Amar of Katina. Furthermore, of Katina called Akrav Dars Lefitumai. And so you can step on spittle as you're walking along. You can step on a snake as you're walking along. And Rav Katina said you can step on a scorpion. Now we move on, but not really. So we'll see a story, a very interesting story. There are different details that need to be figured out. Abba bar Marta, somebody who is known as Abba, son of Marta. Duhu Abba bar Minyomi, who's also known as Abba bar Minyomi. It's possible that his mother was named Martha, and his father was called Minyomi. He owed money to someone in the Reish Kelusa and the Exilarch's household. The Exilarch was the highest political leader of the Jewish people in Bavel, which was a semi-autonomous region. And so the Reish Kelusa had the authority to exercise. I don't know if we'll call it extrajudicial, because maybe that was the legal system, but he had the ability to enforce with a strong hand stuff, including personal accounting, let's say. And so what happened here is Isuya, they brought him in to the exilarch's home, palace, and Kamed Sarile, and he was being tormented. So the initial image that comes to mind is the mob beating up a guy who hasn't paid his debts. It's possible that it was a little more subtle than that. He lost some of his autonomy. He was brought in, and he now has to hang out in the Reish Galusa's household until he figures out how to pay. And so he may have been in a semi-imprisoned state. And as he's there, Haveshadi Ruka, there was spit on the floor. Rashi, Hayaruk Roik Mutulif Neam Shabbos. So this was Shabbos, and there's spittle on the floor. Amalu Reish Galusa. So the Reish Galusa himself, the exilarch himself, announced, I see mana Sachif Alave. Someone please bring a dish, a vessel, cover this up. It's disgusting. Amar Lahu. So Abba Bar Marta tells the Reish Galusa, he was around. Loy Tzrichisu, you don't need to do this. You know why? Hachi Amar Rav Yehuda. I'll tell you the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda. Roik, Darsoy Lifitumai, one is allowed to step on spittle, even though he is smoothing out the earth. If it's unintentional, that's fine. Reish Galusa hears this. He says, Amar Lahu. He says, Subra Mirabanan, this guy is not just any person. He is part of the rabbinic class. He's a Talmud Chacham. Shivkua, please let him free. I don't want to have a Talmud Chacham. I don't want to have on my head that we've imprisoned or harmed the Talmud Chacham. So the interesting thing, there are a few questions in the story that kind of force us to consider what exactly was going on. If the Reish Galusa was so respectful to the rabbis, why is he taking in debtors on Shabbos? Why are they tormenting debtors in a way that probably doesn't sound super consistent with Jewish tradition? And so first of all, if you read it carefully, it probably wasn't the Reish Galusa himself who took this guy in, but it was somebody in the Reish Galusa's family who used the authority of the Reish Galusa to get his way. Most of the commentaries say that he wasn't hauled in on Shabbos. He was hauled in prior to Shabbos, and therefore he's around on Shabbos to make his comments. And maybe the Reish Galusa just become aware of him, or maybe this was an acceptable practice somehow within Jewish law to take in somebody. So the Ben Yoyada, who we like to read from the Ben Yishchai, so the Ben Yoyada explains that it sounds like the impression was that Abba Bar Marta borrowed money and or had funds that belonged to someone in the Reish Galusa's household, and he apparently misappropriated them. And so it isn't simply that he was a debtor that owed money, but he was a person that abused someone else's resources, and that apparently would have made him subject to a greater degree of greater consequences, maybe the likes of our Gemara here, some kind of a semi-imprisonment, as we're mentioned. So he's let free as a result of his wisdom, his chachma, and the like. So some scholars say here is proof you can seize a debtor on Shabbos, but the Ben Yoyada, and this feels better, says that he must have been seized prior to Shabbos.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Did the story take place on Shabbos?
The story apparently is taking place on Shabbos.
So they could discuss monetary matters and enforce debtors to pay on Shabbos.
So
that
I don't.
Strange.
It's very strange. So that's what I was saying. The Ben Yoyada says it must be that he was seized before Shabbos, but he's now in this friendly. He's in a type of debtor's imprisonment. He's lost his full autonomy. He's not locked in a cell, but he's now confined to the house of the exilarch until he becomes motivated to pay up his debt.
The English text suggests that they brought him on Shabbos, not before.
Right. So that's not. Well, anyways, based on the commentaries that I chose to understand the story, that's not the way the story is, but it's vague enough that it could be. Basically, you have a sefer called a halachic work, a responsa work called Nishal David, and he tries to indicate that one could bring in a debtor on Shabbos. But the Rambam says it's prohibited, and the Ben Yehoyada over here that I just referenced indicates that it would not have been happened. It would have not have happened on Shabbos. It would have happened prior to Shabbos, but he's around on Shabbos. He still hasn't managed to figure out his affairs.
But bringing debtors might be okay, but if he agrees to pay, then he will violate Shabbos. I mean,
well, I don't know if he had an option to get out of it.
Him.
The way I imagine, he may have been, he may have had shackles on. He was hanging out in the big hall. They're feeding him, but he has shackles on and he's not free to go. And he's there since whatever. I don't know exactly, but I'll show you inside just so you see I'm not making it up. And the big question, if the Reish Galuta was not a devout person, then okay, he doesn't keep halacha. That's not a surprise. You have many people that don't adhere to the values of the halacha, but from the fact that he is so careful to release and has such value for a Talmud Chacham and also knowledge, he's not just worried about the Talmud Chacham. He's very eager to observe Shabbos and to not have somebody step on spit. So it doesn't quite add up that he would allow them to be seizing people on Shabbos. But nowhere on here does it say that it occurred on Shabbos. As a matter of fact, there's no explicit mention of the word Shabbos at all. But I'll just show you you see, it's all the English commentary here. They brought him to the house on Shabbos to force him, but that's not in the words of the Gemara. Now the Steinsaltz Gemara has how do you call it? Mifarshim that do understand it this way, but I don't think that's the simple reading.
But if it wasn't on Shabbos, never mind the English text, then the exilarch wouldn't ask to cover the spittle.
No, the conversation happened on Shabbos. The question is when he was brought in was not necessarily on Shabbos. It really depends on how you translate the word kamed sarale. Were they beating him or were they locking him up? If they were beating him, unfortunately, that's not a Shabbos activity, but it's more likely that it happened on Shabbos. If he was more in an imprisoned state, then that could have been over a period of time. And from the word shivkua, let him go, it sounds like he was locked up. And so this story is vague enough that we have to fill in many of the blanks to which obviously will vary greatly. So yeah, that's that. That's the story. So it's an interesting story about a guy who obviously was a Talmud Chacham, who somehow gets mixed into some troubling business arrangements, and he ends up being freed by letting them know that he was a Torah scholar. Now, the interesting thing is, how do you know he was a Torah scholar? Maybe he happened to know he knew one quote of Rabbi Yehuda. How does that make him a big Torah scholar? Well, to know halacha is one thing. To know the source, to know the rabbi, to understand that he would prevail in a halachic conversation, indicates a greater deal of familiarity with halacha. I just want to show you here inside just for a moment. Al-Kay nearly vadai. To me, it's clear. The light siaru kadei l'shalom. They weren't actually punishing him so that he would pay. Ela tsaru la'anisha. They were punishing him. This was a prison sentence that had not much to do with getting him to pay. Because they knew he didn't have enough money. What happened is he borrowed money for a business deal and then spent it on his needs. So therefore, what happened is the Reish Galus understood that he misappropriated the funds, and that's why they seized him. And then Ben Yehuda has a whole hidden conversation going on over here, reading between the lines, that he was actually explaining that he did not intend to misappropriate the funds, but things just went amiss. It was lefi tumai. But I guess the point that's relevant for us. Hold on. Here, this Venira. Shabbos. Obviously, they didn't seize him on Shabbos. Prior to Shabbos. They imprisoned him. And with that, maybe they tortured him. And now he's sitting in a cell, or he's shackled over there during the Shabbos meal, or I don't know, during whatever's going on, and maybe they needed him for the minyan, so he's there, but he's shackled, and he had the chance to express his wisdom and also ultimately gain his freedom. So that's how the Ben Yehoyada learns it. But again, others do see the Gemara differently, and so therefore you can take it either way. And Rabbi Steinsaltz clearly chose to interpret it that he was taken on Shabbos, and they're tormenting him on Shabbos. Maybe the people in his household are not very from, but the Reish Kalus himself was, and so he mixed in eventually and says to let this guy go. So that's the story about treading on spittle. Now we have three.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Before we let this go, is there an obligation to treat a Jew being confined for whatever reason differently on Shabbos?
Not necessarily. The question is if there is a halachic endorsement of imprisonment and confinement, period. Generally speaking, in the biblical law and in the halacha, there isn't much of a idea of imprisoning somebody.
I'll ask. The question is the following: if you have a Jewish prisoner and they make him work in a prison, should he be treated?
You can't compel a Jew to be Mechal Shabbos.
Okay.
Is that the question?
No, I'm just thinking. They make him work on a chain gang. Could a Jewish prisoner go and say, for religious reasons, you can't schlep me out on Shabbos to do this?
He can say it. The question is where it's located, and will they listen to him? In Israel,
No, but then you go to law where you're infringing on his right to, where I'm going with this, obviously.
That's in the United States, and in an enlightened government, but I'm sure
enlightened in quotation marks.
Well,
okay, all right.
So yeah, this Gemara should not be used as proof that you can imprison your friends, especially in the United States. That might be considered trafficking or some other kind of not good thing that will compel us to visit you in prison, and we'd rather visit you in your freedom than. All right.
White collar crime.
It's interesting. The story, one aspect of the story is he was in prison because he knew that he couldn't repay the loan and took the loan out anyway. I just read a couple of weeks ago, and also in Israel, a kollel guy who was already older, he and his wife, the kids were already out of the house. They had like 6 kids. So they decided they maxed out all their cards. They took out new cards and maxed them out, and then decided to declare bankruptcy. So the court said, sorry, you can't do that, even though you don't have the funds. You knew that you wouldn't be able to pay off those credit cards, and still you went out and maxed them out. And they
to intentionally spend funds that you know you will not be able to repay, and hoping to have bankruptcy protection, causes them not to be eligible for that said protection.
Well, that was the psak.
Interesting. It sounds fair to me. Well, let's now see the story. So we had Rabbi Abba Bar Kana. He's the one who told us about the snake that fell into the Beis Medrash and somebody killed it, and we wanted to know if Rebbe was being complimentary or not. Well, we have a few other traditions that he shared from the household of Rebbe, and let's take a look. Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kana, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Pamotot shel Beis Rebbe. The candelabra of Beis Rebbe. Rebbe Mutter L'Taltalon B'Shabbos, Rebbe permitted it to be carried on Shabbos. Amar le Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera asked, what kind of candelabra, what kind of candlestick was this? Was this a lightweight or a heavyweight candlestick? Was it something that could be carried with a single hand, or would it need two hands to carry?
What's the problem? He's in his house.
I believe we're talking about muksa. Let's see, and then we'll try to figure out. Rashi says, we're talking about it was a single piece of material, a lamp. We're not talking about that it was made of components. Amarle, the answer was similar to the kinds that are in your house. Who asked the question? Rav Zera asked the question, and he answered him like the ones that are in your father's house. Interestingly enough, we've got a big problem here in understanding what the Gemara is talking about. And once again, here is the downside of using Rabbi Steinsaltz. It's not a downside. It just doesn't allow us to see the full ambiguity of the text. They asked, what was the size? One hand or two hands? He didn't say one hand. He didn't say two hands. He said it's like the ones in your father's house. Well, what do you suppose the candlesticks in Rav Zera's house looked like? Well, we have a problem. Rashi says, look over here. The Ktanai saw you, they were small. But if they're big, they have a set place and they aren't intended to be moved, therefore they're muktzah. Comes Tosfos, and Tosfos says, Pirish Shehem Gedolim. Tosfos says they were large. So Rashi and Tosfos have two diametrically opposed interpretations of the Gemara. What do you make of it?
Rabbi, what does one hand or two hands mean? One person could carry.
So I want to read you the Rashi again. I want
another person.
I want to read the Rashi with you, and I want you to tell me if we can figure this out. Here, Shalbei Savicha. Diktanoi saw you, for they were small. Aval gedoilois, if they were large. Adam koiveya lahem makom. A person has a very precise set space where he intends them to be, and he does not have a intention to move them around, and therefore they become muksa, they become uniquely associated with the place they are put, and the person has no intention to handle them on Shabbos. Whereas a smaller lamp is something that can be moved around. So Rashi is explaining that in the laws of muksa, a small candelabra, a small candlestick, which is frequently moved, that does not become muksa. A large candlestick, it has one set place. The person never has in mind to move it, and therefore he would say it becomes.
What about a case where you have a specific spot for the candelabra during the week? However, on Shabbos, you move it to a different spot, which you usually move it to on Shabbos.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that clearly. Again?
Okay, what happens in a situation where the candelabra, you have a specific designated space for it during the week. However, on Shabbos, you move it to another space on a regular basis. Would that be considered muktzah to move it back to the other place on for during the week on Shabbos, or?
Interesting question. Let's. I don't want to tell you an answer right now offhand, but if you had an intention, if you intended to move it and it wasn't muksa on Shabbos, maybe there wasn't something on it that didn't allow you to move it at the onset of Shabbos, then maybe you'd be allowed to move it. So there are many aspects. Hold on, let me just explain. There are many aspects of muksa that are not being discussed. So if it was lit Erev Shabbos and it burned into Shabbos, there may be a problem that it's muksa because it's a basis with davar ha'asar. You're not allowed to move it when it's lit. That's muksa. Maybe you'll put it out. And so there are many factors that need to be considered before deciding halacha lamasa. But as far as the essential question of can a candlestick that's made out of one single piece be moved? Well, Rebbe allowed them to be moved. He said they're not muksa. Or they said that they're allowed to be moved, they're not muksa. And in order to clarify, Rabbi Zera asked How big? The answer was Kaisa Shel Beis Avicha. Rashi says the small ones are not muksa, but heavy ones, large ones are muksa. Tosfos says no. Mashmos of our Gemara is to teach us a leniency, and it probably extends to larger candlesticks. Let's just really fast glance in the Shulchan Aruch. So I don't know if we're gonna have a chance to do it later. Menorah, a candlestick, a candelabra, a lamp, whether it's large or small, he shall prakim, if it's made out of a bunch of components. It mustn't be handled. It can't be carried. The chayshinan shematipo v'tisparek. We're afraid that it'll fall apart. The yachsirena, and you'll want to rebuild it, restore it. The nimsa oisa kli, and then in the process you are reconstructing a kli which is not allowed on Shabbos. Even if it is made out of a single piece or it is fused together. If it has the appearance that it's made of a bunch of different pieces, you still may not carry it. Menorah. No. So let's see, just real fast. So of course, the halachic commentaries describe when you might not be allowed to move it stamazai for a random reason. Here, let's read the Mishnah Berurah really fast because he actually fills in some of the blanks that I told you we're not going to get to. A lamp is used to light. It doesn't have a Shabbos permissible use. So why isn't it muksa? So there are scenarios that it could be used. Let's say you need the place where the candle is, the lamp is placed, or another reason. Needs to be protected. No, I think hold on. 1 second. Based on this, you should not be allowed to carry the kind of candelabra or candelabra sticks that we make nowadays called leichter. Even if it was never used. So any candlestick that's made up of components, says the Mishnah Berurah, that's out of the question. What our Gemara is talking about is a single piece. It can be carried according to Rashi if it's small, according to Tosfos, even if it is large. I don't know why the halachists don't explicitly clarify, but that's the halacha. I guess the size doesn't really matter in the end, according to the Shulchan Aruch.
Well, maybe the size does matter, because if it's small, then it's most likely not made out of pieces.
So I guess that's the point. You're right. The odds are the smaller it is, the more likely it is made out of a single unit. And if it's larger, it's more likely to be made up of multiple pieces. But let's just see the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't make this distinction. But look at the Rambam. A menorah made out of parts can't be carried, whether it's large or small. Shabbos, lest you put it together, right? As we read in the Shulchan Aruch. If it has how do you call it? Etches to the appearance that it's made of parts. If it's large, then it needs 2 hands. That's too heavy.
What does weight have to do with it?
Well, that's what the Gemara is saying. I'll tell you why. Maybe because it's considered a keli. The smaller it is, it's more likely to be considered a kli. The larger it is, it might be considered. If it's not considered a kli, it's more muksa. That may be the distinction. Let me see if anybody elaborates.
I thought that weight has nothing to do with work on Shabbos.
Not work. It could have bearings on if it's considered a vessel or something else. Or more likely, the issue is it commonly carried? Something that's heavy is usually left in its place. If you don't have intentions to move it, it is more before Shabbos, it is muksa, as opposed to if you commonly move it, well, then the default setting is that it is to be carried.
Rabbi,
Hold on. So the interesting thing, all the commentaries ask is, why are we talking about muksa if the main issue is not muksa? The main issue is rebuilding. Anyways, let's leave it at that. So it looks like if it's heavy, it's not. The odds are that you don't intend to use it. If you don't intend to use it, it becomes muksa. If you don't intend to move it, it becomes muksa. And that seems to be the simple reading of this Gemara. It gets a little more complicated because we have other places in the Gemara that we've learned already that talk about. You basically have two separate issues. You have the issue of rebuilding, and you have the issue of muksa.
If it's heavy, there's more of a chance of it having a designated place.
If it's heavy, yeah. The more heavy something is, the more permanent, more likely that it has a fixed place. The more portable it is, the more likely it is that you frequently move it around.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
So you have a candelabra. It's made of one piece, but you have the little things that you put in to hold the candle. Does that make the candelabra? Because if it falls apart, you're going to put that in and then a candle.
I don't know. That's an interesting question. Probably not, because sticking a candle into a candelabra or oil into a candelabra would not be equated with building something.
No, those little things that you put in before you put in the candle.
If it's not part of the piece, probably not. But if it is part of the piece, then probably yes. You have candelabra that have those little inserts that are part of the piece, and then you have others that you just put in a disposable.
Right, disposable. Insert. I'm thinking of disposable.
So the disposable inserts, I don't suppose would be. All right, let's see the next story. Rabbi Abba Bar Kana, Rabbi Chanina. Another thing that Rabbi Abba Bar Kana taught in the name of Rabbi Chanina. Karoinois Shelbeis Rebbe. What are karoinois? Mutul Taltalam b'Shabbos. Let's get you another translation here. Wagons. The sedan chairs. What is a sedan chair? Anybody know?
Yeah, it's probably the ones that were carried. Like
carry the person around with them?
No. They used to carry people in them. Here, you got a picture.
Right, like a not right, like so here.
Right.
These are pretty. Should we get one?
Getting one is not the problem.
Getting
somebody is going to be the problem.
It depends who's sitting on it. Again, it's going to be heavy versus light.
Right, you're saying the person inside might have strong bearings on.
That's the segue.
So Rabbi Steinsaltz translates, and that's probably right, the sedan chairs. The Art Scroll says we're talking about the wagons. A passenger wagon. Let's see if anybody else weighs in here. Yeah, a wagon for a person, whether it's a sedan chair or something on wheels. Mutter l'taltalam b'Shabbos, they may be carried on Shabbos. Right, asuyis livnei adam. Okay, now that makes sense. Amar le Rabbi Zera, b'nitolam b'adam echad le'b'shnei b'nei adam. Are we talking about that one person carries it, or that it needs two people? Amar le, he responded, ka'oisan shel beisav avicha, the type that you are used to from your household. What does that mean? So again, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experience with sedan chairs, let's say. But suffice it to say, he asked, are they the big or small? And he says, the one like your father's house. And once again, we don't have here clarity if his father's house had big or small, but based on
Is he intimating that he could follow the rules of what was done in his father's house?
No, he's just giving a definition. The reason why he chooses to define it this way, I don't know. Maybe he was trying to use something that was familiar. Or, sometimes if you'll overhear a conversation, two guys are talking, they understand each other. But as a third party listening in, you might not understand it. So here's an instance, I think, where we're listening into a conversation that to the people of the time, it made a lot of sense. Rabbi Zera knew what the furniture looked like in his home. Unfortunately, we don't. And that makes this Gemara a little more interesting. But based on Rashi's interpretation in the previous Gemara, that we're talking about a small candelabra, it is likely that here too, we're talking about a smaller wagon. We could assume, not that we could, but we might assume that similarly here, we're talking about a smaller thing that's carried by a single person.
How can a single person carry that? All of them.
That's an interesting question. I don't know, but from the question, I understand that there was. Maybe we're talking about if somebody's not inside of it. Probably that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about using it. We're talking about moving it around on Shabbos to get it out of the way.
Well, look at a rickshaw.
I'm sorry?
I said, look at a rickshaw. One person moves a rickshaw around.
Right? Maybe something like a wheelchair. If it's on wheels, it can be moved around. Many others disagree with Rashi once again and would say that just because two people could carry it, that wouldn't make it muksa. That's still considered a keli, a vessel that's transportable and commonly moved around. But
today the question would be about a wheelchair, I imagine.
Right. But most wheelchairs can be pushed by a single person. The difference is they're pushed, they're not schlepped. So that is the second question. There's a third question, or a third comment, which takes us all the way to the next Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kana, similar teaching from Rabbi Abba Bar Kana. This time we don't get a mention. Hitter Lahem Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina similarly permitted Lebeis Revi Lishtois Yayin the Kuroinois Shalgoy to drink wine transported by a Gentile. So long as the wine had a single seal. Those who joined us, Mark, are you there? No, is Mark here? No. Those who joined us for our study of Meseches Avodah Zarah at Yeshiva night in times before COVID would recall that the Gemara in Avodah Zarah talks at length about different restrictions for how to handle and protect the integrity of wine, and you need to have two chosamot, two seals. But Rabbi Chanina permitted the household of Rabbi to drink wine that only had one seal. And I didn't know the reason behind it. Rabbi Abba Bar Kana says, I don't know the reason behind Rabbi Chanina's teaching. Either because he paskined like Rabbi Eliezer, the Amr b'Meseches Avodah Zarah. Rashi shows us that if you learn Meseches Avodah Zarah, Daf Lamed Aleph, he says, Yayin muter b'choisam echad. You're allowed to drink wine if there is only a single seal. Alternatively, people were afraid to mess with Yehuda Hanasi's household. They were afraid of the prince. Rashi, Shahaya Hanachri Hameviyai, the Gentile porter who's bringing the wine, Yarei min Hanasi. They were afraid of the Nasi. Shahaya Shalit al Pia Malchus, because his authority was sanctioned by the government, the Roman government. Being that Rabbi Abba Bar Kana shared a story about a snake in the base medrash of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the Gemara similarly brings three isolated and not related or not directly related comments and stories about other halachas that were unique, distinct in the household, or at least discussing the household of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So it's not that they were allowed to drink wine that was tampered with. It was that there was a greater confidence that the wine was not going to be tampered with because no one wanted to mess with the Nasi. This concludes this Mishnah, the Mishnah that we've been reading for the last several days, the Mishnah that discusses using a keli to cover a beam from being exposed to fire, and a keli to cover up waste, which we discussed maybe was chicken waste, and the discussion of covering up a scorpion, which triggered a lengthy discussion about the killing of dangerous animals on Shabbos. We're almost out of time, but I do want to peek at the next Mishnah just to give us a preview, and Amir Hashem will resume next Monday. So let's take a look at this Mishnah. And again, this opens, as Rebberal might say, a can of worms. I don't think it's a can of worms. It introduces us to a glorious, important, and big discussion about Amira Le'akum, the relationship between us instructing a Gentile to desecrate Shabbos on our behalf. And in truth, we mentioned this previously when we were talking about firefighting, but now let's see a more broad discussion. Mishnah, Goy Shehidlik es haner. I should point out that we're using here the Steinsaltz Gemara, but this is not actually the language in the original Mishnah. I don't know why they changed. Well, I do know why. I'll tell you why. Anywhere in Jewish manuscripts that it said Goy, in the Gemara, it was changed to Nachri or Akum, because the censor wanted to not have, but apparently, I guess they amended it here to say a Goy. Same thing. A Gentile, she lit a candle. A Jew is allowed to use the light of the candle. But if the Gentile exclusively lit the candle for you, also one is prohibited from using that candle. Another example, mile mayim lahashkois behemtoin. The Gentile drew water into the, what do they call it? What do you call it? The thing that you pour the
Trough.
What is it? A trough?
Yeah.
Trough. I think.
Trough. So you pour the water into the trough for the animal. Mashke Achav Yisrael, the Jew may allow his animal to drink from that same water. The Imbish Shil Yisrael. But if the Gentile did that work for the Jew, Asr, it is prohibited. What's wrong with that? We'll see soon. Well, probably because he was taking something from the Rosh Hashanah. Aslagoy Keves Leiridboy, if a Gentile made a ramp.
Are we talking about Shabbos still?
On Shabbos. A Gentile built a ramp. Leiridboy to disembark a boat. Yoirid Achar of Yisrael. The Jew can follow behind the Gentile. The Imbishvil Yisrael, but if the whole reason why the ramp was positioned or built was for the Jew, also it is prohibited. So 3 instances. In each instance, the Gentile does something which benefits the Jew. If it was for the Gentile's own interest, the Jew may enjoy it after the fact. If it is on behalf of the Jew is prohibited from enjoying and making use of that service. Maseh b'Rabbi Gamliel. There was a story with Rabbi Gamliel, Uzekanim, and the elders. Shahayu boyim basfina, and they were traveling by boat, maybe from Rome to Israel, because there are many stories where the rabbis had to travel to Rome to appeal, to lobby on behalf of the Jewish people. A Gentile built a ramp to disembark. Yardu boy Rabbi Gamliel Zakanim, and the Rabbi Gamliel and the elders made use of that very ramp, and they disembarked. Rashi explains what this kavesh is. These large boats need a large ramp to disembark. Now, the question that's going to be asked is, how are they allowed to disembark from a boat on Shabbos? Isn't there an issue of Tchum Shabbos? So here we have our initial introduction, an initial taste to the fact that one is not allowed to have a Gentile do malacha. Not only are they not allowed to ask, but if they know the Gentile is doing it exclusively on behalf of the Jew, it is prohibited. Obviously, this is a complex, nuanced conversation, and with Hashem's help, in the coming days, starting next Monday, we'll continue exploring this wonderful segment of the Gemara and of our tradition of Shabbos observance. Wishing our dear friends a healthy, prosperous Shabbos, a peaceful Shabbos, and look forward to seeing everybody again.
Smooth sailing.
And for those that live in Florida, by the way, we are experiencing some lovely weather. Well, we experienced this morning some lovely weather. And so we wish everyone a dry rest of your day. And thank you all for being here.
Shikoyach, good Shabbos, good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Shabbos.